All right, is this happening? Are am I even live at all? Does this microphone even have little coiled wires inside of it being powered to do anything with my voice? Well, one thing's for sure is my little camera's not working. But in lieu of that, instead of my dumb face, uh, we're gonna try something a little different. I've seen other galaxy-brained genius people who make content and who make judgments about things like debates and things. Uh, they're always playing video games at the same time. So we're gonna try that, and I'm gonna play some Stardew Valley while we do our hour two semi-final recap. And I just want to kind of get into the mind of these gamer guys and girls and NBs and figure out why is it that I don't know, maybe there's something about the playing the game that allows their mind to sort of zero in on the truly important things. I mean, you might think, "Oh, that's actually just going to be a fucking distraction and stuff." And they're probably missing lots of things. And that might be true. We might miss lots of things, but it's not going to be because it might be because I'm playing a video game, you know? But luckily, this is not usually that kind of show. This is Kudos Live. We spend an infuriatingly long time to go through very small bits of material, repeating them many, many times, and making it as boring and tedious as possible in order to absorb every word, to know every lick and every scrap and every doodle. Now, today I don't even have the transcript up. I got the transcript on the video, on the YouTube transcript, so I can glance up at that. But to be honest, I'm probably going to be keeping my eyes on that little green fishing bar as it bobbles up and down, try to keep the fish on the hook. My Stardew heads will know what I'm talking about. At least those who prefer fishing. You know, my first playthrough of this, I didn't actually like fishing that much. But I kind of got way into it. There's actually a lot more to it. It's a lot deeper than I realized. Hang on one second. I'm just going to go ahead and pop on the old live stream and just give her a listen. Make sure I'm actually coming through. Okay. I'm sorry for that pause. I was listening to my own stream on my phone to make sure that it didn't sound all crackled and weird. Actually, we're gonna have to test the video sound quality. So let's take it back to our beginning point. We're starting at 1 hour. We're gonna go to the 2 hour mark, and we're gonna do our semi-final recap of hour two. So be sure to let me know if I missed anything, especially if I was distracted because I was playing the dang video games. Let me know if that happens.
Cecil Rhodes, of course, was the British colonialist after whom the former white minority regime in
Okay, this is called self sound testing. What you do is you just bring up your own stream on your phone. and then listen to it, see what it sounds like. So I think this actually needs to be up
in Rhodesia
nice and loud.
was named. And Herzl also
But on my
says
headphones, I can take it
explicitly
down a bit.
in his diaries that it is
See how that
essential to remove the existing population from Palestine.
Can I respond to this?
All right, I think it's something like that. All right. So hour 2, by the way, if you don't know, hour 2 is actually not 1 hour. It's one of those funny things people don't know about. That hour 2 is not an hour long. A lot of people don't realize that. People come up and they say, hour 2, 60 minutes long, right? I say, no, listen. It's called hour 2, but it's actually more like 67 minutes long, right? It's the same, and that's kind of how shit is. You know, like, have you ever heard, 2x4s? The type of wood, a 2x4? Guess how long they are? They're like 1.9 by like 3 point fuck you or something. They're not exactly 2x4 on purpose. I'm not just saying like I found a bad 2x4 that didn't measure up. Literally go out with a microscope with a measuring tape and see exactly how long a 2x4 or how wide and long, a 2x4. It should be 2x4, right? But they're never exactly 2x4. They just call them 2x4s because it's just a shorthand. It's better than saying, give me the 1.89 by 3.78. Say, give me the 2x4. So much easier. So that's why we'd say hour 2, right? We don't say hour and 7 minutes part 2. I mean, it wouldn't even be a part 2. It'd be a unique name. So it would just be part 1. And then that would be confusing if I was like, hour 1, hour 1 and 7 minutes. It wouldn't be clear that that was the second part. Also, hour 1 is not an hour long. Oh my God, he admitted it. Hour 1 was actually less than an hour. Because I cut off the first 5 minutes of the video because they're just recapping or they're just playing little snippets of what's to come, as you may have seen in many videos. Many podcasts and many different programs on YouTube do enjoy doing the first thing I see when I start the video is like something happening in the middle of the video. Now, I am a conscientious objector of those portions of videos. I naturally always skip over them. I don't know if anyone else has that habit. It's a habit I developed in, let's say the early 2010s, 2011, 2012, is that anytime I open any kind of internet video, I always skip the first 10, 20, 30 seconds, depending on the total length of the video. And I'm usually right about doing that because it usually is like I just kind of chunk it off. The first little chunk, I snip it off, I throw it away. And usually what I land on is like fade in. Hello and welcome to the thing. Here's the very start of the thing. Like it's after the theme music, it's after the theme song, or it's after the fucking ad or whatever they do, you know? That's my way of doing it. I even recommend you do that with these streams because it's usually the beginning is just like an audio check. And I'm not talking about anything important at all. So if you're going back through the back catalog of the old streams, I would say skip to like 30 minutes, 40 minutes in. And then if you're like really curious, you could take it back a little bit if you miss something, but I'd say you could definitely break off like the first 10 minutes of any of them. 20 minutes probably. Uh I mean, and if we're being honest, you could chop the whole beginning off so much that you just don't even ever watch the video. That's cool too. We're gonna play. Hold on, hang on, wait a minute. A pregnant pause. That's what we had there. Um, Today we're gonna play hour two, slightly longer than 2 hours, and it's going to be accompanied by the playing of games of the video variety. Uh, Today's video to game will be called Stardew Valley. And I'm excited because what happened was this weekend I had no internet for like 2.5 days. No internet. I was jonesing for something. And I thought, well, this is okay. I could do some drawing. I could do some editing. There's a lot of offline stuff, creative stuff that I've wanted to do. You know, it's all possible. And then I remembered that I have a Nintendo, and I thought, well, just a couple minutes or two of this should be kind of fun. And I was looking at what game to play, and I saw the old Stardew Valley. I haven't played this game in like, God, probably 5 years. I think I got it in 2000. No. It was well before that. It was well before the COVID lockdowns because I remember everyone else was playing fucking Animal Crossing. And I was like, nah, I don't want to play that because I have already played Stardew Valley so much. This game gets so addictive. The game cycles are brutal. Brutal. Absolutely brutal. I mean, it's an ingeniously designed game to make it to where you're constantly like you're always in this perpetual state of like doing it, grinding for something else, getting your reward for a thing, while still like aching and yearning for the things you can't have yet. The hustling and the planning, it's just like there's never ever a good time to stop playing. I mean, technically when your character goes to bed or whatever, but then like as soon as you go to bed, you have to watch all your money count up, and occasionally you'll get some level up where you've got new things to craft, new skills, or sometimes just like a weird thing will happen. Like one time, this lady, it was like a witch flying by. I swear, this was one of the times when I was like, I should just turn it off and go to bed now. And I put my character to bed, and they have a cutscene of a witch flying in the air, and she's dropping lots of little mystery boxes everywhere. It doesn't show you where they're dropping. It just shows them falling down out of the screen. And then we get a little message, mystery boxes can now be found. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to step out my door, and there's going to be a weird box somewhere in my yard. And then I'm going to walk around town, and there's going to be more of them. And it'll probably be something I can, like, you know, just hit with an axe or something. No, not at all. I ended up forgetting about them entirely because as soon as I left and looked around for mystery boxes, I got, like started fishing, doing other shit, just like got distracted, went on a whole thing, and then like 4 in-game days later, right? So it's like 10 minutes, 20 minutes later, I'm like chopping a tree down and I find a fucking mystery box. I'm like, what the fuck? Forgot about these. And it was like hidden in a tree, so they're not going to be visible on the map. They're going to be something you have to find while you're foraging. You know? So I can't just farm trees and cut the shit on my own farm all the time. I got to go out in the world and release it to that forest to the south and cut their trees down. All right. Now, if you look, if you can see, as you can see, can you see with me? This is my farm, Framfrung's farm. My character's name is Framfrung. And Framfrung has chickens. We got a few chickens. And as you can see, they're popping out some bangers, some eggs. Look, I got large eggs that have the purple star. For those of you who are not in the know, purple stars are better than yellow stars. And yellow stars are better than silver stars. But you know what's better? I mean, what's the worst? Having no fucking stars. So this is just an egg. Regular brown chicken egg. Yeah, fuck off. You're an egg. No stars. And it's not even a large egg, right? All the different products you get come in multiple qualities. You can get a 0 star. You can get a silver star, a gold star. But what everyone is here, what all my homies fuck with, is purple stars. Now, I actually don't know the difference in like selling price. Maybe we could check that out. But I shouldn't be too focused on this kind of stuff. What I'm hoping to do is take out my fishing pole and go fuck off to the beach early in the morning. What did I just? Yeah, there it is. It's already 10:40, but I just want to spend a whole day at the beach fishing. I'm gonna empty my what's it called? Inventory of everything except for these Mackie rolls. Because I can't, if I don't have any food, I can't last all day. I'm gonna go down there. I need bait, and the bait shop's right there anyway, so I can buy bait when he opens up. And the only other like chore we gotta do is we gotta come down here and pet each of these chickens, collect their eggs, stick them in the box. That's pretty much our only chores. After that, like if there's maple syrup growing or whatever, that's fine. I got sprinklers on this shit, so I'm not gonna water. This is an interesting thing to come up. This looks like this is like a mystery tree. I found this weird kind of seed that's just like, oh, this grows a mysterious type of tree. So I'm excited to see what this is going to be. So anyway, yeah, I'm not fucking with farming too much. I don't want to be running around like big rows of crops and all that shit. I might get down with that later, but I'm just like growing a little bit of corn, growing some fucking tree syrups and saps. I got chickens, and the rest of the time I just go fishing, man. I occasionally go down to the caves and do a little mining if I have to, but I really don't like it. There's my little kitty cat. So we're going to throw on hour 2. We're going to do a recap, a semi-final recap. All right. This is kind of the introduction to the recap. So we watched hour one. I watch it once. We go back. I do the long streams where we pause every two fucking sentences and then talk for 20 minutes. Right? That's kind of the second in-depth review of the debate. And then I do my recaps. This is a dead tree. We're going to cut it down. So then we do the recaps, and the recaps have 2 rounds, the semifinal and the final. So in the semifinal recap, we are recapping after our detailed analysis to just sort of cover any other shit we didn't notice in the detailed one, probably because we were so detailed that we got lost and then just jumped back on track, and we didn't jump back on the track where we left it off from. We jumped ahead of it or something. That happens a lot. And there's also times when I just didn't pay attention to something the first time around, maybe didn't understand something. We'll see. And we're also going to see if the video gaming affects the semi-final recap. What am I doing? Oh, you know what I forgot to do is throw all my shit. Oh, man. So I'm going to get about a half day of fishing, but then tomorrow we'll make it a full day. Speaking of starting it, let's start the video. Here we go.
That it is essential to remove the existing population from Palestine.
Can I respond to this?
In a moment, please. He says we shall have to spirit the penniless population across the borders and procure employment for them elsewhere or something. And Israel Zangwill, who you mentioned, a land without a people for a people without a land. They knew damn well it wasn't a land without a people. I'll continue, but please go ahead.
Just to this, there is one small diary entry in Herzl's vast
it's 5
diary.
volumes.
Yeah, 5 volumes. There's one paragraph which actually mentions the idea of transfer. There are people who think that Herzl was actually pointing to South America when he was talking about that. The Jews were going to move to Argentina, and then they would try and buy out or buy off or spirit the penniless natives to make way for Jewish settlement. Maybe he wasn't even talking about the Arabs in that particular passage. That's the argument of some people. Maybe he was, but the point is, it has only a 1/100th of a 1% of the diary which is devoted to this subject. It's not a central idea in Herzl's thinking. What Herzl wanted, and this is what's important, not Rhodes. I don't think he was the model. Herzl wanted.
Right now, my headphones right now are fucked. I'm getting some scrambly bambly sound here. I'm just gonna change change my settings real quick here. All right.
To create a liberal, democratic Western state in Palestine for the Jews. That was the idea. Not some imperial enterprise serving some imperial master, which is what Rhodes was about.
It's already fucking 5 o'clock because I keep forgetting to pause the game while I get distracted with other shit. Jesus, gonna do some night fishing this time. I don't think we'll even make it in time to buy bait. He closes at 6. We gotta run.
But to have a Jewish state which was modeled on the Western democracies in Palestine. And this, incidentally, was more or less what Weizmann and Ben Gurion wanted. Ben Gurion was more of a socialist. Weizmann was more of a liberal Westerner. But they wanted to establish a social democratic or liberal state in Palestine. And they both envisioned through most of the years of their activity that there would be an Arab minority in that Jewish state. It's true that Ben Gurion strived to have as small as possible an Arab minority in the Jewish state, because he knew that if you want a Jewish majority state, that would be necessary. But it's not something which they were willing to translate into actual policy.
Okay,
Just a
so-
quick pause to mention that for people who are not familiar, Theodor Herzl, we're talking about over a century ago. And everything we've been talking about has been mostly 1948 and before.
Yes. Just one clarification on Herzl's diaries. I mean, the other thing that I recall from those diaries is he was very preoccupied with, in fact, getting great power patronage, seeing
Yes.
Palestine, the Jewish state in Palestine, I think his words, an outpost of civilization against barbarism.
Yes.
In other words, very much seeing his project as a proxy for Western imperialism in the Middle East.
Right word. Not proxy. He wanted to establish a Jewish state which would be independent. To get that, he hoped that he would be able to garner support from major imperial powers,
including the Ottoman Sultan,
Yes,
who he
yes,
tried to
exactly.
cultivate. I just want to respond to a point you made earlier, which was that people expressed their rejection of the partition resolution on the grounds that it gave the majority of Palestine to the Jewish community, which formed only a third. Whereas, in fact, if I understood you correctly, you're saying the Palestinians and the Arabs would have rejected any partition resolution.
Yeah,
I think
a couple things. That one, they would have rejected any. Two, a lot of that land given was in the Negev. It was pretty terrible land at the time. And
Well-
then three, the land that would have been partitioned to Jews, I think would have been, I think I saw it was like 500,000 Arab. It would have been 500,000 Jews, 400,000 Arabs, and I think like 80,000 Bedouin would have been there. So the state would have been divided pretty close.
I think you raise a valid point, because I think the Palestinians did reject the partition of their homeland in principle. And I think the fact that the United Nations General Assembly then awarded the majority of their homeland to the Zionist movement only added insult to injury. I mean, one doesn't have to sympathize with the Palestinians to recognize that they have now been a stateless people for 75 years. Can you name any country, yours, for example, or yours, that would be prepared to give 55%, 25%, 10% of your country to the Palestinians? Of course not. And so the issue was not the existence of Jews in Palestine. They had been there for centuries. And of course, they had ties to Palestine, and particularly to Jerusalem and other places, going back centuries, if not millennia. But the idea of establishing an exclusively Jewish state at the expense of those who are already living there, I think it was right to reject that. And I don't think we can look back now, 75 years later, and say, well, you should have accepted losing 55% of your homeland because you ended up losing 78% of it, and the remaining 22% was occupied in 1967. That's not how things work.
Yeah.
And I can imagine an American rejecting giving 10% of the United States to the Palestinians, and if that rejection leads to war and you lose half your country, I doubt that 50 years from now you're going to say, well, maybe I should have accepted that.
Sure. So I like this answer more than what I usually feel like I'm hearing when it comes to the Palestinian rejection of the 47 partition plan. Because sometimes I feel like a weird switch happens to where the Arabs in the area are actually presented as entirely pragmatic people who are simply doing a calculation and saying like, well, we're losing 55% of our land. Jews are only maybe 1/3 of the people here. And we've
Recognized.
but the territory itself was, but not of the Palestinian people to have a right or
Keep using is nonsense. the state which Ben Gurion envisioned would be a Jewish majority state, as they accepted the 1947 partition resolution, as Stephen said. That included 400,000 plus Arabs in a state which would have 500,000 Jews. So the idea of exclusivity wasn't anywhere in the air at all among the Zionist leaders in 47, 48. They wanted a Jewish majority state, but were willing to accept a state which had 40% Arabs. That's one point. The second thing is the Palestinians may have regarded the land of Palestine as their homeland, but so did the Jews. It was the homeland of the Jews as well. The problem was the Arabs were unable and remain to this day unable to recognize that for the Jews, that is their homeland as well. And the problem then is, how do you share this homeland? Either with one binational state or separate this, partitioned into two states. The problem is that the Arabs have always rejected both. Of these ideas. The homeland belongs to the Jews, as Jews feel, as much as it does, if not more, than for the Arabs. I would say for the Jews. It's the Jewish people's
I would also,
homeland.
Real quick, I just want for both of you guys, because I haven't heard these questions answered. I really want these questions to be, I'm just so curious how to make sense of them. It was correctly brought up that I believe that Ben Gurion had, I think Shlomo Ben-Ami describes it as an obsession with getting validation or support from Western states, Great Britain, and then a couple decades later,
that
it becomes
explains the Suez War, the Suez crisis.
Exactly, correct. That was one of the major motivators, the idea to work with Britain and France on a military operation
Imperial
against Arabs.
stooge.
But then the question again I go back to, if that is true, if Ben Gurion, if the early Israel saw themselves as a Western fashion nation, how could we possibly imagine that they would have engaged in the transfer of some 400,000 Arabs after accepting the partition plan? Would that not have completely and totally destroyed their legitimacy in the eyes of the entire Western world? Would there not have been? How not?
Well, first of all, I think that the Zionist leadership's acceptance of the partition resolution and I think you may have written about this, that they accepted it because it provided international endorsement of the legitimacy of the principle of Jewish statehood. And they didn't accept the borders. And in fact, later expanded the borders. Second of all,
No,
the borders were expanded in war.
They accepted the UN partition resolution, borders and all.
That's how they accepted.
You can say that some of the Zionists, deep in their hearts, had the idea that maybe at some point they would be able to get more.
Including their most senior leaders who said so, and I think you've quoted them as saying so.
But they grudgingly accepted what the United Nations, the world community, had said, this is what you're going to get.
And second of all, I mean, removing darker people, it's intrinsic. It's intrinsic.
Jews are as dark as Arabs.
It's intrinsic to Western history. So the idea that Americans or Brits or the French would have an issue with, I mean, the French had been doing it in Algeria for decades. The Americans have been doing it in North America for centuries. So how would Israel forcibly displacing Palestinians somehow besmirch Israel in the eyes of the West?
Even in the 1944 resolution of the Labor Party, and at the time even Bertrand Russell was a member of the Labor Party, it endorsed transfer of Arabs out of Palestine. As Muin's pointed out, that was a deeply entrenched idea in Western thinking, that there was nothing, it doesn't in any way contradict or violate or breach any moral values to displace the Palestinian population. Now, I do believe there's a legitimate question. Had it been the case, as you said, Professor Morris, that the Zionists wanted to create a happy state with a Jewish majority, but a large Jewish minority, and if by virtue of immigration, like in our own country, given the current trajectories, non-whites will become the majority population in the United States quite soon. And according to democratic principles, we have to accept that. So if that were, I would say maybe there's an argument that had there been mass Jewish immigration, changed the demographic balance in Palestine, and therefore Jews became the majority. You can make an argument in the abstract that the indigenous Arab population should have been accepting of that, just as whites in the United States, quote unquote whites,
What did it
have
say
to
it
be
was getting
accepting
late?
of the fact that
First
the
thing in the morning.
demographic majority is shifting to non-whites in our own country. But that's not what Zionism was about. I did write my doctoral dissertation on Zionism, and I don't want to get now bogged down in abstract ideas. But as I suspect you know, most theorists of nationalism say there are two kinds of nationalism. One is a nationalism based on citizenship. You become a citizen, you're integral to the country. That's sometimes called political nationalism. And then there's another kind of nationalism, and that says the state should not belong to its citizens. It should belong to an ethnic group. Each ethnic group should have its own state. It's usually called the German Romantic idea of nationalism. Zionism is squarely in the German Romantic idea. That was the whole point of Zionism. We don't want to be Bundists and be one more ethnic minority in Russia. We don't want to become citizens and just become a Jewish people in England or France. We want our own state.
Like the Arab 23 states.
No, wait. Before we get to the Arabs, let's stick to the Jews for a moment, or the Zionists. We want our own state. And in that concept of wanting your own state, the minority at best lives on sufferance and at worst gets expelled. That's the logic of the German Romantic Zionist idea of a state. That's why they're Zionists. Now, I personally have shied away from using the word Zionism ever since I finished my doctoral dissertation. Because
Was that painful?
Because, as I said, I don't believe it's the operative ideology today. It's like talking about Bolshevism and referring to Khrushchev. I doubt Khrushchev could have spelled Bolshevik. But for the period we're talking about, they were Zionists. They were committed to their exclusive state with a minority living on sufferance or at worst expelled. That was their ideology. And I really feel there's a problem with your happy vision of these Western Democrats like Weizmann, and they wanted to live peacefully with the Arabs. Weizmann described the expulsion in 1948 as, quote, the miraculous clearing of the land. That doesn't sound like somebody shedding too many tears at the loss of the indigenous population.
Let me just respond to the word
you're
unsufferance.
respond to
The unsufferance I don't agree with. I think that's wrong. The Jewish state came into being in 1948. It had a population which was 20% Arab when it came into being. After Arab refugees, many of them had become refugees, but 20% remained in the country. 20% of Israel's population at inception in 1949 was Arab.
80% went missing.
No. We're talking about what remained in Palestine, Israel, after it was created. The 20% who lived in Israel received citizenship and all the rights of Israelis, except, of course, the right to serve in the army, which they didn't want to. And they have Supreme Court justices, they have Knesset members. They
I
enjoyed
think they lived under emergency laws until
yeah,
1966.
for a period, sure, they
Yeah.
lived under
So they didn't
no,
immediately
no,
have
no, no.
citizenship.
No, wait a
This
second.
is just fantasy.
At the beginning, it's not fantasy. At the beginning, they received citizenship, could vote in elections for their own people, and they were put into parliament. But in the first years, the Israeli, the Jewish majority suspected that maybe the Arabs would be disloyal because they had just tried to destroy the Jewish state. Then they dropped the military government and they became fully equal citizens. So if the whole idea was they must have a state without Arabs, this didn't happen in 49, and it didn't happen in the
Then why did you
decades.
say, Professor Morris?
Yes.
Then why did you say without a population expulsion, a Jewish state would not have been established?
Because you're missing the first section of that paragraph, which was that they were being assaulted by the Arabs, and as a result, a Jewish state could not have come into being unless there had also been an expulsion of the population which was trying to kill them.
Norm, I'm officially forbidding you referencing that again.
I think.
Hold on a second, wait. We responded to it. So the main point you're making, we have to take Benny at his word, is like there was a war, and that's the reason why he made that statement.
I think just one last point on this. I remember reading your book when it first came out, and reading, one incident after the other, and one example after the other, and then getting to the conclusion where you said the Nakba was a product of war, not design. I think were your exact. And I remember reacting almost in shock to that I felt you had mobilized overwhelming evidence that it was a product of design, not war. And I think our discussion today very much reflects, let's say, the dissonance between the evidence and the conclusion. You don't feel that the research that you have conducted and published demonstrates that it was in fact inherent and inbuilt and inevitable. And I think the point that Norm and I are making is that your own historical research, together with that of others, indisputably demonstrates that it does. I think that's a fundamental disagreement we're having here.
Can I actually respond to that? Because this is actually, I think this is emblematic of the entire conversation. I watched a lot of Norm's interviews and conversations in preparation for this, and I hear Norm will say this all over and over and over again. I only deal in facts. I don't deal in hypotheticals. I only deal in facts. I only deal in facts. And that seems to be the case, except for when the facts are completely and totally contrary to the particular point you're trying to push. The idea that Jews would have out of hand rejected any state that had Arabs on it or always had a plan of expulsion is just betrayed by the...
Man, Steven's fucking annoying. It's kind of bizarre watching this without pausing so much now. Oh, by the way, hello. I can't actually see that chat very well because my eyes are too big, which makes all the text seem smaller. I literally have to turn on my monitor to see this. But man, Pestiny Lamp. Okay, it's Lamp. Hello, Lamp. Oh boy. You wrote 10 minutes ago. Sorry for being so late to acknowledge you. But man, Steven is bad. He just really very clearly and obviously disrupts the flow of the conversation, of the substance of the conversation. He just spends so much time just kind of going after people, either people who aren't in the conversation, or in this time it's Norm. And it's one thing to say, Norm, you always say you deal with facts and not hypotheticals. But what about this? And point out where he's wrong. That's what you're meant to do in a fucking debate, right? You impeach your witnesses, impeach them with their own words. That's what we like to see happen. If someone said a thing, that's admissible, okay? And they're in a debate, especially if it's about the very topic we're talking about. but the way he just has to be so repetitive and drony, he just annoys the fuck out of me every time. He annoys me ever, Tim. Ever goddamn Tim. So, yeah, well, let's keep going.
The acceptance of the 47
I
partition
don't
plan.
think you understand politics. Did I just say that there is a chasm that separates your ideology from the limits and constraints imposed by politics and reality? Now, Professor Morris, I suspect, would agree that the Zionist movement from fairly early on was committed to the idea of a Jewish state. I am aware of only one major study, probably written 40 years ago, the binational idea in mandatory Palestine by a woman. I forgot her name now. You remember her.
I'm trying to.
Yeah. Okay, but you know the book.
I think so.
Yeah, she is the only one who tried to persuasively argue that the Zionist movement was actually, not formally, actually committed to the binational idea. But most historians of the subject agree the Zionist movement was committed to the idea of a Jewish state. Having written my doctoral dissertation on the topic, I was confirmed in that idea because Professor Chomsky, who was my closest friend for about 40 years, was very committed to the idea that binationalism was the dominant trend in Zionism. I couldn't go with him there. But Professor Morris, you are aware that until the Biltmore Resolution in 1942, the Zionist movement never declared it was for a Jewish state. Why? Because it was politically impossible at the moment until 1942. There is your ideology, there are your convictions, there are your operative plans, and there's also separately what you say in public. The Zionist movement couldn't say in public, we're expelling all the Arabs. They can't say that. And they couldn't even say, we support a Jewish state until 1942.
You're conflating two things. The Zionists wanted a Jewish state,
Yes.
correct? That didn't
That didn't
mean
mean mass
expulsion
expulsion,
of the
that's what I was
Arabs.
saying, yeah.
It's not the same thing.
This part bugs me when Benny's like, you're conflating two things. Norm was not conflating two things. I don't have my notes. What was Norm doing?
They couldn't even say, we support a Jewish state until 1940.
Okay. Norm is pointing out the fact that their counter argument is false, right? What is their counter argument? Benny Morris's counter argument is that expulsion was never officially part of the policy or doctrine. It was never stated as a policy position by any major Zionist parties until 1947, right? So he's saying they should have had those policies. We would have seen those official policies well before 1947 if this were inevitable. That's Benny's argument. Norm is pointing out that they talked about expulsion but didn't make it official written policy because it wasn't politically expedient, or you couldn't get away with it politically at that point. They had to move the Overton window, and they used that 47 war as the pretext to do exactly that, right? That's when they explicitly... That same process happened when the Overton window was even further. Even just the idea of the Jewish state at all. First, it was more like, we just want a place where we're allowed to go, right? a home for the Jews. And they had to shift the Overton window and then say, we want a Jewish state. There was a point where the Zionist movement didn't even declare officially their intention to have a Jewish state. Right? They didn't even say like, oh no, it's not a Jewish state, just, a home for us. And putting the position of, no, we want a Jewish state, which means we have the majority, a clear majority, that's the kind of state we want. And then the whole idea of partitioning, right? If we look at the existing Jews and the existing Palestinians, if there's some way to sort of carve it up to where we can theoretically wall off certain portions of the country until the populations work out to where the majority of Jews are all at this one place, right? That was initially, I guess, dipping into the water, right? So Norm is explaining that this whole process of, no, the Jewish Zionists' official positions were always way less radical than the intended ideology, right? These official platform policies that they put forward are always going to be like less radical than what they really, really want. And Norm is just pointing this out. And then Benny's comeback of, you're conflating two things. Just because they wanted a Jewish state didn't mean they wanted to expel everybody. Those are two different things. Norm never presented them as if they were the same. He was literally pointing out how they were two different things. One happened first. The other one happened later. First, they finally reached a point where it was politically viable enough to outright declare the position of wanting a Jewish state, right? But at that point, there was nothing in their position about expelling the Palestinians, right? That was all free and clear. That wasn't part of any policy, right? You could say the same thing about statehood. Before whatever, I can't remember the year he said, it was in the 30s. Before that point, they would say, hey, there's nothing in the official policies about us wanting a Jewish state with a Jewish majority. No, we're just saying we just want a place where we're free to go without persecution, right? So anyway, that's what's going on. He didn't conflate two things. He literally explained how one thing is happened just like a very similar thing happened before that. That's all it was. That's not conflation. We've gone into depth about conflation and what that is, right? That's when you really are treating two things as if there were one thing, or more than one thing, as if it was just a single thing. It's also switching around the definitions of words, right? Like when Stephen goes from people to people. People can mean those people, a couple people over there, the people under the stairs, right? Or you could say people as in a people live in this region of the forest or whatever. We're talking about a ethnic group, a nation, a community, a people. Those are different. A few people cannot make decisions for a people, right? That's the idea. People. And if you conflate those and you try to make your argument and then, you mean one version of people in one hand and then you rebut it with a different version of people, it's conflation. It's stupid. And it confuses your audience, especially people who are just lazily playing video games and not really paying attention. And you just hear Norm go, I don't know of no people who would voluntarily cede their nation. And then Destiny goes, yeah, except all the people that voluntarily sold their land. And like Destiny fans are going to be like, oh, oh, he just roasted him. He just got him, dude. But if you're intelligent and you were actually listening and following Norm's line of thinking and his what he was saying, Destiny's comeback makes absolutely no sense. It makes no sense. All right, let's get back to it.
Me too.
You're conflating two things. The Zionists wanted a Jewish state,
Yes.
correct? That didn't
That didn't
mean
mean mass
expulsion of the
expulsion, that's what I'm
Arabs.
saying, yeah.
It's not the same thing. They wanted a Jewish state with a Jewish majority, but they were willing, as it turned out, both in 37 and in 47, and subsequently, to have an Arab
In
minority,
37 was
a
supposed to be
large,
transfer.
a large Arab
In 37,
minority.
there was a
They
transfer.
were willing to have a large Arab minority
come
in the
on.
country, and they ended up with a large Arab minority in the country.
Oh,
20% of the
They
population
ended
in
up-
49
they
was
ended
Arab,
up-
and it still is
They ended up for
21%.
about 5 minutes before they were expelled. They agreed to
No,
it
no,
until
no,
47, and then they were gone by March
No, they
1949.
were
What happened in between the rejection of the partition plan and the expulsion of the Arabs?
The Arabs launched the war.
Well, yeah. Well, I
That's
mean,
the
like,
point.
it wasn't random. Like, there's a potential
I
that
agree, it
even
wasn't random.
there was-
I totally agree with that.
Yeah,
it
but
was by design.
you can
It
say
wasn't
that.
random.
You can say that, but in this case, the facts betray.
Steven is so fucking stupid. I don't know. Like, when he cut in the middle, he's like, well, what happened between the blah, 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 blah? Like, it literally just sounds like a guy who's like, wait a minute, I'm confused. Like, what? Wait, what happened between the thing? And then Benny, like, answers him as if he's like, well, this happened. And then Steven immediately just pivots to, well, I think, well, yeah, but... Like, he had no idea. He's not helping Benny's side at all. He's such a fucking fool.
I mean, like, it wasn't random. Like, there's a potential
I
that
agree, it
even
wasn't random.
there was-
I totally agree with that.
Yeah,
it
but
was by design.
you can
It
say
wasn't
that.
random.
You can say that, but in this case, the facts betray you. There was no Arab acceptance of anything that would have allowed for a Jewish state to exist.
Of course
Number
not.
one, and number two, I think that it's entirely possible, given how things happen after war, that this exact same conflict could have played out, and an expulsion would have happened without any ideology at play. That there was a people that disagreed on who had territorial rights to a land. There was a massive war afterwards, and then a bunch of their friends invaded after to reinforce the idea that the Jewish people in this case couldn't have a state. There could have been a transfer regardless.
Anything could have been, but that's not what history is about.
History is about
yeah,
Palestinian rejectionism
okay.
to any peace deal
As I
over
said,
and over and
as
over
I
again.
said, when the ball was thrown into the court of the United Nations, they were
Just that shit right there. When Norm goes, that's not what history is about. And then Stephen goes, history is about the Palestinian Arabs rejecting every peace deal. Like, what a literal fucking nonsensical sentence that is. Like, it's literally just like the little kid trying to be like, oh, your face, Bob. Like, just repeat whatever they said, but like change one thing. That's not what history's about. History is about Palestinian rejectionism to any peace deal over and over and over again. History is about Palestinian rejectionism to any peace deal over and over and over again. Hey, what's history about? History is about Palestinian rejectionism. You fucking dip fuck. Like, is this guy for real? There could have been transfer regardless. Anything could have been, but that's not what history is about. Fair point, Norm. Fair point. Although, we are definitely delving into what could have been, what would have been. Norm himself made those kinds of arguments. He's like, hypothetically, in the abstract, this sort of thing could have worked. Now, in that case, he wasn't trying to talk about history as much as he's trying to discuss the morality of what actually happened, right? So he's taking a a moral position by saying, here's what happened that was immoral. Now, had it happened differently, that, in my view, would have been moral. And that is a feasible, like, realistic reality. Like, so he's trying to point out that he doesn't have, like, an unreasonable measure of what's fair and moral in this situation. He's saying, like, oh, fucking, you know, he's using hypotheticals in that case, in that sense, right? And then Stephen comes in, and he's saying, I guess he's basically arguing they could have transferred, or they could have just been peaceful if they accepted the partition plan and refused to, like, go to war and shit. I don't know. His arguments are whack, and we're going to go through them in more detail, of course, in our final recap, but this is just, he pisses me off. He pisses me off, and then I go off. I start
You're
yelling,
faced with a
Steven,
practical
you're a dumb motherfucker, Steven. You are such a stupid guy. Want to bub. What a stupid dumb face. You got a dumb butt. And your face is like a butt. And your face sounds like a butt. And you're as smart as a butt. And you don't know shit. 'Cause you're stupid motherfucking sick freak. What a dumb, sick, dumb freak you are. Oh, Stephen, Pestiny, Bonell, Mr. Morelli.
problem. And I, for one, am not going to try to adjudicate the rights and wrongs from the beginning. I do not believe that if territorial displacement and dispossession was inherent in the Zionist project, I do not believe it can be a legitimate political enterprise. Now, you might say that's speaking from 2022 or 2020. Where are we
Four
now?
now, I think.
Okay. But we have to recognize that from nearly the beginning, for perfectly obvious reasons, having nothing to do with anti-Semitism, anti-Westernism, anti-Europeanism, but because no people that I am aware of would voluntarily cede its country.
Except for all the people that sold land voluntarily.
You can perfectly understand Native American resistance to Euro-colonialism. You can perfectly well understand it without any anti-Europeanism, anti-whiteism, anti-Christianism. They didn't want to cede their country to invaders.
I think
that's completely understandable.
You're minimizing the anti-Semitic element
You minimized
in Arab
in
nationalism.
all your books. You minimized.
No. The Husseini was an anti-Semite. The leader of the Palestinian national movement in the 30s and 40s was an anti-Semite. This was one of the things which drove him, and also drove him in the end to work in Berlin for Hitler for 4 years, with giving Nazi propaganda to the Arab world, calling on the Arabs to murder the Jews. That's what he did in World War II. That's the leader of the Palestinian Arab national movement.
Why is it?
And he wasn't alone. He wasn't alone.
Why is it that if you read your book, Righteous Victims, you can read it and read it and read it and read it, as I have, you will find barely a word about the Arabs being motivated by anti-Semitism.
It exists, though.
Even I didn't say it doesn't exist.
You agree that it exists.
Hey, I don't know a single non-Jew who doesn't harbor anti-Semitic
We're talking about
sentiment.
Arabs now.
Yeah, but I don't know anybody. That's just part of the human condition. Just
Anti-Semitism.
Yes, I
Husseini
do,
was
I do.
an ordinary
And among the
anti-Semite.
Arabs.
So, Professor Morris, here's my problem. I didn't see that in your Righteous Victims. Even when you talked about the First Intifada and you talked about the second intifada, and you talked about how there was a lot of influence by Hamas, the Islamic movement. You even stated that there was a lot of anti Semitism in those movements. But then you went on to say, but of course, at bottom, it was about the occupation. It wasn't about, and I've read it.
Yeah, but you're moving from different,
No,
different
I'm not moving.
ages, across
I'm
the
talking
ages.
about your whole book.
The
Your whole
occupation
book.
began in
I
67, the one you're
looked,
talking about.
I looked and looked and looked for evidence of this anti-Semitism as being a chief motor of Arab resistance to Zionism. I didn't see it.
You like
Did he make that claim?
I don't remember the word chief.
Yeah.
It's one of the
I-
elements.
Very binary
It's one of the
thinking when it comes
elements.
to like,
Binary.
analyzing. Yes, binary.
Yeah.
Please don't give me this postmodernism binary. You're the
No, but
one.
you are thinking in terms
You're
of
the
black
one
and
that
white.
said
He's
the
got- no,
chief
Stephen has a
motor.
point.
Do you have your book
You
here?
do talk about
Page
black
137.
You talk in black
Excuse
and
me,
white.
page 37.
You're talking in black and white concepts when history is much grayer. Lots of things happen because of lots of reasons, not one or the other. And you don't seem to see that.
Can I ask you a question? Because it's for them to talk to. Just a very quick
Yes.
question. What do you think the ideal solution was on the Arab side from 47? What would they have preferred? And
Well,
what would
they
have
were
happened
explicit.
and then the second one, what would have happened if Jews would have lost the war in 48? What do you think would have happened to the Israeli population, or Jewish population?
I think the Palestinians and the Arabs were explicit that they wanted a unitary, I think, federal state, and they made their submissions to UNSCOP. They made their appeals at the UN General Assembly.
What do you mean by unitary and federal? I don't get that. They wanted an Arab state. They wanted Palestine to be an Arab state.
Yes,
Put it
yes.
simply.
But I
Without
think-
the word unitary, federal, they wanted Palestine
Yes, but
as
I
an
think-
Arab and exclusively Arab state.
No, it wasn't
That's
an
what they wanted.
no, it wasn't an exclusively Arab state. I think we have to distinguish between Palestinian and Arab opposition to a Jewish state in Palestine on the one hand, and Palestinian and Arab attitudes to Jewish existence in Palestine. And there's a fundamental
Well,
difference.
Husseini, the leader of the movement, said that all the Jews who had come since 1917, and that's the majority of the Jews in Palestine in 1947,
Yes.
shouldn't be there.
Well, he
They
did say
shouldn't be citizens and they shouldn't be there.
He did-
PLO
he
Charter
did
said
say
that in
that.
64.
Yes, they
I'm
said
not
the
going to
same.
deny
Yes,
it.
the
Of
PLO
course,
also said
it's
that.
true. I
Yes.
can understand the sentiment, but I think it's wrong.
But also,
can
you guys
understand
are
that.
the ones.
we agree
you
on
guys,
this. I also
I
think
want
and
to
just to be
answer
clear, you
your
guys earlier,
question.
because you
I
used the
wanna-
words earlier that it was supremacy and exclusivity that the
Well,
Zionist
I
state
want to
was built
answer
on,
your
but-
question. As you Husseini did say that, and I'm sure there was a very substantial body of Palestinian Arab public opinion that endorsed that. But by the same token, I think a unitary Arab state, as you call it, or a Palestinian state, could have been established with arrangements, with guarantees, to ensure the security and rights of both communities. How that would work in detail had been discussed and proposed, but never resolved. And again, I think Jewish fears about what would
a
have
second
happened.
Holocaust. That's what we're
Well,
talking
no,
about.
I think
That was the Jewish fear. A
Well,
second
that-
Holocaust.
that may well have been the Jewish fear.
Yeah.
It was an unfounded Jewish fear.
It was unfounded?
Of course, it was unfounded.
What about like in
Well,
48 and 56
you
and
really
67?
think that the Palestinians, had they won the war, were going to import ovens and crematoria
I don't know if it
from
would have been
Germany
that bad,
and
but there
and
were
burn- no,
programs
that's-
across in almost every single Arab state where there were Jews living after 48, after
Mhm.
56, after 67. There were always pogroms. There were always flights from Jews from those countries to Israel
There- there-
afterwards.
there
I
were
don't think it would
fli-
be.
I wouldn't say there were always pogroms in every Arab state. I think there was flight of Arab Jews for multiple reasons. In some cases, for precisely the reasons you say. If you look at the Jewish community in Algeria, for example, their flight had virtually nothing to do with the Arab-Israeli conflict. The issue of Algerian Jews was that the French gave them citizenship during their colonial rule of Algeria, and they increasingly became identified with French rule. And when Algeria became independent, and all the French ended up leaving out of fear or out of disappointment or out of whatever, the Jews were identified as French rather than
But
Algerian.
this is a bit of a red herring. There were pogroms in the Arab countries, in Bahrain even, where there's almost no Jews. There was a
I'm
pogrom
not-
in
I'm-
1947. There was a pogrom in Aleppo in 1947.
I'm not denying
There
any
were,
of that history.
killings of Jews in Iraq and Egypt
I'm not
in
deni-
1948, 49.
I'm not
So,
denying any.
but the Arabs, the Jews basically fled the Arab states not for multiple reasons. They fled because they
No,
felt that the governments there and the societies amid which they had lived for hundreds of years no longer wanted them.
Look,
media.
without getting into the details, I think we can both agree that ultimately a clear majority of Arab Jews who believed that after having lived in these countries for
Way
ce-
before
for
the
centuries,
Arabs, way
for
before the Arabs
centuries,
arrived there.
for centuries,
Way
if,
before the
for
Arabs arrived
centuries,
in Iraq.
for centuries, if not millennia, came to the unfortunate conclusion that their situation had become untenable.
Yes.
I also think that we can both agree that this had never been an issue prior to Zionism and
This
the
isn't
emergence
true.
of the
There were
state of Israel.
pogroms prior to
Look,
Zionism.
I'm not.
Pogroms didn't begin with Zionism in the Arab world.
The issue is the point I raised, which is whether these communities had ever come to a collective conclusion that their position had become untenable in this part of the world. No, they were Arab Jews.
Well, because untenable meant there was no alternative, but with the creation of Israel, there was an alternative, right? A place where they could go and not be discriminated against or live as second-class citizens or be subject to Arab majority states. I also think it's interesting that, like, when you analyze the flight of Jewish people, and I've seen this, that it wasn't just, I agree with you, it wasn't just a mass expulsion from all the Arab states. There were definitely push factors. There were also pull factors. Now, I don't know how you guys feel about the Nakba, but when the analysis of the Nakba comes in, again, it's back to that, well, that was actually just a top-down expulsion. The retreat of wealthy Arab people in the 30s didn't matter. Any of the messaging from the surrounding Arab states didn't matter. It was just an expulsion from Jewish people or people running from their lives from Jewish massacres. Again, it's like that. I feel
Again,
like
I'm
it's
a little
selective. It's a selective
uncomfortable
critical
always
analysis
using
of
the term Jewish here because it wasn't the Jews of England or the Soviet Jews.
Well, I say
There's
Jewish
an-
because prior to 48,
I
saying
thi-
Israeli, the
I
Yishuv, I
think
guess.
I think I think we should. I think
I wonder if I
it's useful to say refer to Zionists before 1948 and Israelis after 48. We don't need to implicate.
Well, sure, but
Jews
the
elsewhere.
Jewish people that were being attacked in Arab states weren't Zionists; they were just
Okay,
Jews
allow
living
me
there,
to
right?
just comment on that. I was rereading Shlomo Ben Ami's last book, and he does at the end discuss at some length the whole issue of the refugee question, bearing on the so-called peace process. And on the question of 48 and the Arab emigration, if you allow me, let me just quote him. Israel is particularly fond of the awkwardly false symmetry she makes between the Palestinian refugee crisis and the forced emigration of 600,000 Jews from Arab countries following the creation of the State of Israel, as if it were, quote, an unplanned exchange of populations, unquote. And then Mr. Ben Ami, for those of you who are listening, he was Israel's former foreign minister, and he's an influential historian in his own right. He says, in fact, envoys from the Mossad and the Jewish Agency worked underground in Arab countries and Iran to encourage Jews to go to Israel. More importantly, for many Jews in Arab states, the very possibility of emigrating to Israel was the culmination of millennial aspirations. It represented the consummation of a dream to take part in Israel's resurgence as a nation. So, this idea that they were all expelled after 1948, that's one area, Professor Morris, I defer to expertise. That's one of my credos in life. I don't know the Israeli literature, but as it's been translated in English, there is very little solid scholarship on what happened in 1948 in the Arab countries and which caused the Jews to leave.
Arab Jews.
Arab Jews, right. But Shlomo Ben Ami knows the literature. He knows the scholarship.
He
He's
also
a
comes from
historian.
Tangiers.
Yeah,
He's from
They
Morocco.
came
right. So
You have
he
Abi
knows this.
Schleim from Iraq
And-
who's written on this issue.
And they
as
wrote
well.
that the Jews in the Arab lands were not pro-Zionist. They weren't Zionists at all. So certainly Avi Schleim's family was
And
anti-Zionist.
Avi Shlaim, when he was interviewed by Meron Rappaport on this question, he said, "You simply cannot say that the Iraqi Jews were expelled. It's just not true." And he was speaking as an Iraqi Jew who left with his father, family, in 1948.
They were pushed
So-
out. They weren't expelled.
Well,
That's probably the right phrase.
I
They
think
were
it's
pushed
I
out.
think it's more complex than that. I think it was. Sorry, I interrupted
no,
you.
you're not interrupting me because I don't know. I only know what's been translated into English, and the English literature on the subject is very small and not scholarly. Now, there may be a Hebrew literature, I don't know. But I was surprised that even Shlomo Ben Ami, a stalwart of his state, fair enough, on this particular point, he called it false symmetry.
No, Stephen is right. There was a pull and a push mechanism in the departure of the Jews from the Arab lands post 48. But there was also a lot of push. A lot of push.
That's indisputable.
Okay,
There was
that's-
put.
that's-
Yeah.
And on
what
the
Stephen
point
was
of
saying.
agreement, let us on this one brief light of agreement, let us wrap up with this topic of history and move on to modern day. But before that, I'm wondering if we could just say a couple of last words on this topic. Stephen?
Yeah, I think that when you look at the behaviors of both parties in the time period around 48, or especially 48 and earlier, there's this assumption that there was this huge built-in mechanism of Zionism and that it was going to be inevitable from the inception of the first Zionist thought, I guess, that appeared in Herzl's mind, that there would be a mass violent population transfer of Arab Palestinians out of what would become the Israeli state. I understand that there are some quotes that we can find that maybe seem to possibly support an idea that looks close to that. But I think when you actually consult the record of what happened, when you look at the populations, the massive populations that Israel was willing to accept within what would become their state borders, their nation borders, I just don't think that the historical record agrees with the idea that Zionists would have just never been okay living alongside Arab Palestinians. But when you look at the other side, Arabs would out of hand reject literally any deal that apportioned any amount of that land for any state relating to Jewish people or the Israeli people. I think it was said even on the other end of the table that Arab Palestinians would have never accepted, the Arabs would have never accepted any Jewish state whatsoever. So it's interesting that on the ideology part, where it's claimed that Zionists are people of exclusion and supremacy and expulsion, we can find that in diary entries, but we can find that expressed in very real terms on the Arab side, I think, in all of their behavior around 48 and earlier, where the goal was the destruction of the Israeli state. It would have been the dispossession of many Jewish people. It probably would have been the expulsion of a lot of them back to Europe. And I think that very clearly plays out in the difference between the actions of the Arabs versus some diary entries of some Jewish leaders.
Benny?
Well, one thing which stood out, and I think Moin made this point, is that the Arabs had nothing to do with the Holocaust, but then the world community forced the Arabs to pay the price for the Holocaust. That's the traditional Arab argument. This is slightly distorting the reality. The Arabs in the 1930s did their utmost to prevent Jewish immigration from Europe and reaching Palestine, which was the only safe haven available, because America, Britain, France, nobody wanted Jews anywhere, and they were being persecuted in Central Europe and eventually would be massacred in large numbers. So the Arab effort to pressure the British to prevent Jews reaching Palestine's safe shores contributed indirectly to the slaughter of many Jews in Europe, because they couldn't get to anywhere and they couldn't get to Palestine because the Arabs were busy attacking Jews in Palestine and attacking the British to make sure they didn't allow Jews to reach this safe haven. That's important. The second thing is, of course, there's no point in belittling the fact that the Palestinian Arab National Movement's leader, Husseini, worked for the Nazis in the 1940s. He got a salary from the German Foreign Ministry. He raised troops among Muslims in Bosnia for the SS, and he broadcast to the Arab world calling for the murder of the Jews in the Middle East. This is what he did. And the Arabs since then have been trying to whitewash Husseini's role. I'm not saying he was the instigator of the Holocaust, but he helped the Germans along in doing what they were doing, and supported them in doing that. So this can't be removed from the fact that the Arabs, as you say, paid a price for the Holocaust, but they also participated in various ways in helping it happen?
Right.
I'll make 2 points. The first is you mentioned Haj Amin al Husseini and his collaboration with the Nazis. Entirely legitimate point to raise, but I think one can also say definitively had Haj Amin al Husseini never existed, the Holocaust would have played out precisely
Certainly,
as it did.
certainly.
As far as Palestinian opposition to Jewish immigration to Palestine during the 1930s is concerned, it was of a different character than, for example, British and American rejection of Jewish immigration. They just didn't want Jews on their
Yeah, but
soil.
objectively, it helped the Germans kill the
In the
Jews.
Palestinian case, their opposition to Jewish immigration was to prevent the transformation of their homeland into a Jewish state that would dispossess them. And I think that's an important distinction to make. The other point I wanted to make is we've spent the past several hours talking about Zionism, transfer, and so on. But I think there's a more fundamental aspect to this, which is that Zionism, I think, would have emerged and disappeared as yet one more utopian political project had it not been for the British. What the preeminent Palestinian historian Walid Khalidi has termed the British Shield. Because I think without the British sponsorship, we wouldn't be having this discussion today. The British sponsored Zionism for a very simple reason, which is that during World War One, the Ottoman armies attempted to march on the Suez Canal. Suez Canal was the jugular vein of the British Empire, between Europe and India. And the British came to the conclusion that they needed to secure the Suez Canal from any threat. And as the British have done so often in so many places, how do you deal with this? Well, you bring in a foreign minority, implant them amongst a hostile population, and establish a protectorate over them. I don't think a Jewish state in Palestine had been part of British intentions. And the Balfour Declaration very specifically speaks about a Jewish national home in Palestine. In other words, a British protectorate. Things ended up taking a different course, and I think the most important development was World War II, and I think this had maybe less to do with the Holocaust and more to do with the effective bankruptcy of the United Kingdom during that war and its inability to sustain its global empire. It ended up giving up India, ended up giving up Palestine. And it's in that context, I think, that we need to see the emergence of a Jewish state in Palestine. And again, a Jewish state means a state in which the Jewish community enjoys not only a demographic majority, but an uncontestable demographic majority, an uncontestable territorial hegemony, and an uncontestable political supremacy. And that is also why, after 1948, the nascent Israeli state confiscated, I believe, up to 90% of lands that had been previously owned by Palestinians who became citizens of Israel. It is why the new Israeli state imposed a military government on its population of Palestinian citizens between 1948 and 1966. It is why the Israeli state effectively reduced the Palestinians living within the Israeli state as citizens of the Israeli state to second class citizens, on the one hand, promoting Jewish nationalism and Jewish nationalist parties, on the other hand, doing everything within its power to suppress and eliminate Palestinian or Arab nationalist movements. And that's why today there's a consensus among all major human rights organizations that Israel is an apartheid state, what the Israeli Human Rights Organization B'Tselem describes a regime of Jewish supremacy between the river
Yeah,
and the
this is
sea.
you're really tempting a
Yes.
response from the other side on the last few sentences, and
Propaganda, yeah, okay.
we'll talk about the claims of apartheid and so on. It's a fascinating discussion. We need to have it. Norm,
On the question of the responsibility of the Palestinian Arabs for the Nazi Holocaust, direct or indirect, I consider that an absurd claim. As Gromyko said, and I quoted him, the entire Western world turned its back on the Jews. To somehow focus on the Palestinians strikes me as completely ridiculous. Number two, as Moeen said, there's a perfectly understandable reason why Palestinian Arabs wouldn't want Jews, because in their minds, and not irrationally, these Jews intended to create a Jewish state which would quite likely have resulted in their expulsion. I'm a very generous person. I've actually taken in a homeless person for 2.5 years. But if I knew in advance that that homeless person was going to try to turn me out of my apartment, I would think 10,000 times before I took him in. Okay? As far as the actual complicity of the Palestinian Arabs, if you look at Raoul Hilberg's 3-volume classic work, The Destruction of the European Jewry, he has in those 1,000+ pages one sentence on the role of the Mufti of Jerusalem. And that, I think, is probably an overstatement, but we'll leave it aside. The only 2 points I would make aside from the Holocaust point is, number one, I do think the transfer discussion is useful because it indicates that there was a rational reason behind the Arab resistance to Jewish or Zionist immigration to Palestine, the fear of territorial displacement and dispossession. And number two, there are 2 issues. One is the history, and the second is being responsible for your words. Now, some people accuse me of speaking very slowly, and they're advised on YouTube to turn up the speed 2 to 3 times whenever I'm on. One of the reasons I speak slowly is because I attach value to every word I say. And it is discomforting, disorienting, where you have a person who's produced a voluminous corpus, rich in insights and rich in archival sources, who seems to disown each and every word that you pluck from that corpus by claiming that it's either out of context or it's cherry picking. Words count. And I agree with Lex. Everybody has the right to rescind what they've said in the past. But what you cannot claim is that you didn't say what you said.
I'll stick to the history, not the current propaganda. 1917, the Zionist movement began way before the British supported the Zionist movement for decades. In 1917, the British jumped in and issued the Balfour Declaration supporting the emergence of a Jewish national home in Palestine, which most people understood to mean eventual Jewish statehood in Palestine. Most people understood that in Britain and among the Zionists and among the Arabs. But the British declared the Balfour Declaration, or issued the Balfour Declaration, not only because of imperial self-interest, and this is what you're basically saying. They had the imperial interests, a buffer state which would protect the Suez Canal from the east. The British also were motivated by idealism, and this incidentally is how Balfour described the reasoning behind issuing the declaration. And he said the Western world, Western Christendom, owes the Jews a great debt, both for giving the world and the West, if you like, values, social values as embodied in the Bible, social justice and all sorts of other things. And the Christian world owes the Jews because it persecuted them for 2,000 years. This debt we're now beginning to repay with the 1917 declaration favoring Zionism. But it's also worth remembering that the Jews weren't proxies or attached to the British imperial endeavor. They were happy to receive British support in 1917, and then subsequently, when the British ruled Palestine for 20, 30 years, but they weren't part of the British imperial design or mission. They wanted a state for themselves, the Jews, happy to have the British support them, happy today to have the Americans support Israel. But it's not because we're stooges or extensions of American imperial interests. The British, incidentally, are always described in Arab narratives or propaganda as consistent supporters of Zionism. They weren't. The first British rulers in Palestine, 1917, 1920.
Herbert Samuel.
No, before Herbert Samuel. Samuel came in 1920. The British ruled there for 3 years previously, and most of the leaders, the British generals and so on, who were in Palestine, were anti-Zionist. And subsequently, in the 20s and 30s, the British occasionally curbed Zionist immigration to Palestine, and in 1939 switched horses and supported the Arab national movement and not Zionism. They turned anti-Zionist and basically said, you Arabs will rule Palestine within the next 10 years. This is what we're giving you by limiting Jewish immigration to Palestine. But the Arabs didn't actually understand what they were being given on a silver platter, Husseini again, and he said, no, we can't accept the British White Paper of May 1939, which had given the Arabs everything they wanted, basically, self-determination in an Arab majority state. So what I'm saying is the British at some point did support the Zionist enterprise, but at other points were less consistent in this support. And in 1939, until 1948, when they didn't vote even for partition, for Jewish statehood in Palestine in the UN resolution, they didn't support Zionism during the last decade of the mandate. It's worth remembering that.
I'd like to respond to that. I mean, speaking of propaganda, I find it simply impossible to accept that Balfour, who, as British Prime Minister in 1905, was a chief sponsor of the Aliens Act, which was specifically
He changed his mind.
which was specifically designed
To
to
keep out
keep
Jews.
persecuted Eastern European Jews out of the streets
But he changed
of the
his mind.
UK, and who was denounced as an anti-Semite by the entire British Jewish establishment. A decade later, all of a sudden,
Changed his mind.
this people change their minds, but when the changing of the mind just coincidentally happens to coincide with the British imperial interest, I think perhaps the transformation is a little more superficial than he's being given credit for. It was clearly a British imperial venture, and if there had been no threat to the Suez Canal during World War I, regardless of what Balfour would have thought about the Jews and their contribution to history and their persecution and so on, there would have been no Balfour
Can I ask
Declaration.
real quick as a question on that? Why did the British ever cap immigration then from Jews to that area at all?
Well, we're talking now about
20s and
1970.
30s.
I
Sure,
think-
but I'm saying that if the
No,
whole goal was just to be an imperialist project, like there were terrorist attacks from Jewish, from
yes, but you're talking. I'll answer
yeah, in the
you.
40s, yeah.
And we're talking now about 1917, and as I mentioned earlier, I don't think the British had a Jewish state in mind. That's why they used the term Jewish national home. I think what they wanted was a British protectorate, loyal to and dependent upon the British. I think an outstanding review of British policy towards these issues during the mandate has been done by Martin Bunton of the University of Victoria, and he basically makes the argument that once the British realized the mess they were in, certainly by the late 20s, early 30s, they recognized the mess they were in, the irreconcilable differences, and basically pursued a policy of just muddling on, and muddling on in the context of British rule in Palestine whose overall purpose was to serve for the development of Zionist institutions, Yeshuv's economy, and so on, meant, even if the British were not self-consciously doing this, preparing the groundwork for the eventual establishment of a Jewish state. I don't know if that answers your question.
Except they did turn anti-Zionist in 1939.
Yes, of course.
And
because
maintain
they were being
that
shot up by
maintain that
because-
Zionist. No, before they were being shot up, but maintain that anti-Zionist posture until 1948.
Okay.
And if I may, just also one point. You mentioned Haj Amin al-Husseini during World, entirely legitimate. But what I would also point out is that you had a Zionist organization, the Lehi,
300 people. More or less.
300 people, one of whom happened to become an Israeli prime minister, an Israeli foreign minister, a speaker of Israeli parliament.
Maybe you should give his name.
Yitzhak Shamir, proposing an alliance with Nazi Germany in 1941.
Shamir proposed.
Well, no, the Lehi proposed.
Some people in the Lehi proposed.
Of which Shamir was a
but
prominent
this is
leader.
a red herring also.
No. Okay. Well, if he's a red herring, Haj
The
Amin
Lehi was
al-Husseini is a red whale. I'm sorry.
The Lehi was an unimportant organization in the Yishuv. 300 people versus 30,000 belonged to the Haganah. So it was not a very important organization. It's true, before the Holocaust actually began, they wanted allies against the British where they could
We're
find them.
talking 1941 here, not
We're talking
1931.
1940.
41, from what I recall.
1940. They approached the
The
German
Brit-
emissary in
Ankara,
Istanbul or something.
Yes.
Istanbul.
And
But they-
if I may, proposed an alliance with Nazi Germany on what the Lehi described
But
as
the
on the
Lehi was
basis of
reviled by the mainstream
shared
of Zionism.
shared
no,
ideological
they didn't
principles.
share ideological.
Well, they said they did.
No,
They
they didn't.
said.
They reviled.
Why are you doing
the-
these things? Of
the
course
Lehi
they
was
said it.
reviled
You
by the
know the
majority.
state, but
The
you
Lehi
know
was
that
reviled.
you know what the statement said on the basis of a shared ideology. Why do you say no?
Do you think that
You
the
could
Lehi,
just-
wait, the
when you
Lehi people
say-
were Nazis? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying
They
that's
said
what
they were.
they said.
No, are you saying that? Forget
Okay,
statements. You like to
okay.
quote things, but
I do
were
like
they
to
were
quote
they
things. It's
Nazis?
called
Were the Lehi Nazis? That's what I'm asking.
What did he
Some of
just
them
say?
supported
Did he
Stalin,
say that the
incidentally.
basis of the pact was their agreement on ideology?
There wasn't any pact. They suggested.
I
They
said,
proposed an
wasn't it?
agreement.
Right. And what did the agreement say?
They wanted arms against the British. That's what they
did the
wanted.
agreement
Yeah, well,
say?
that's what Haj Amin al-Husseini wanted also. That's what
No, but
others
they didn't.
in
work-
India
the
and
Lehi people
elsewhere.
didn't work in Berlin helping the Nazi regime.
I mean, it's what the IRA wanted also.
No, but this is
you
what
know.
Haj Amin al-Husseini did. You know that he was an anti-Semite. You've probably read some of his works.
Yes.
He wasn't just anti-British.
and-
he was also anti-Semitic.
And
So he had a common ground with Hitler.
I
It's as
think
simple as that.
we can
Not
agree.
every anti-Semite is a Hitlerite.
I think
I
we
thought
can.
that part.
He
we
literally
didn't
worked
even
with the
have
Nazis
say.
to recruit people. He wasn't just
Yes,
a guy posting
and he was
or
an absolutely revolting, disgusting human being.
This I'm happy
I
to
have
hear.
no.
But the
If
problem
you
is you're
think
saying that
I
Husseini
don't
was his
believe
influence.
that,
You're saying the Mufti
But
was.
I don't even understand, of all the crimes you want to ascribe to the Palestinian people, trying to blame them directly, indirectly, or indirectly 3 times removed for the Nazi Holocaust is completely lunatic.
Hold on. Wait, he's not blaming them for the Holocaust.
Yes,
He's
of
saying that from the
course he is.
perspective.
No.
Wait. No, he's saying that from the perspective of Jews in the region, Palestinians would have been
That's not
part
what
of the
he's
region.
saying.
That is exactly.
You have not
that is
read
literally
him.
what he said.
I've read him.
You've read him and you don't understand
you've
him.
read
He sits right
Wikipedi-
here.
Believe me, I'm a lot more literate than you, Mr. Borelli.
I'm going to believe the guy that wrote
You
the
read
stuff.
what Wikipedia said.
That's great.
I
And you
read
don't even
Benny
speak
Morris.
Hebrew, and you call yourself an Israeli historian.
I
Okay?
just-
We're all
I
here on
just-
different grounds. Okay?
I
But
just
the
want, if I
reality
can
is-
just respond.
Well,
to
no.
you.
I'm just saying that there were two
You're
tricks.
saying nothing.
Okay, that's where we got our first Norm mispronouncing Mr. Borelli's name. Mr. Borelli. That happened. That's how we're gonna cap off hour 2. All right. So that was good. You know what the video game helps with? It helps with the incessant pausing, right? Because when I'm gaming, I'm not pausing. Because I want to keep playing my game rather than pause and talk. So in one sense, it does kind of help to just sort of sit back and listen, without interjecting. So I don't know what happens when I eat this star drop. It's strange, but the taste reminds you of toast. Your maximum energy level has increased. Okay, that's good. Actually, I'm happy. I wasn't sure if I wanted that thing or not, or if I cared. Where's my energy level? I don't know. I can't see it. But that's good. All right, so I had some kind of ticket that I was supposed to be able to get a prize for. I don't like the slingshot game. I don't know. Maybe I can't remember what it said when I bought the prize ticket. I thought it said you could just ask him to give you the prize. Oh. Mammoth. That's pretty good. There we go. All right. So what do we think about hour 2? And what does it have in common with hour 1? Well, I suppose it's the fact that we're still in the past, talking about what happened around 1947. According to the YouTube video, the way he puts it is, he says the first part is called 1948, hour 1, and the second hour is called partition. And I guess that's kind of fair. Like, they spend a lot of time talking about the partition agreement and if it was fair or not. Guess I'll get some dried sunflowers. I guess I just leave. I don't know. I don't know what to do. Leave the Stardew Valley Fair once you do the festival? End. Sure will. All right. 10 p.m. Let's check on the chickens. Little chickadees. All right. And they've all got their hay. I'm going to close their little door. And, let's make some money. We got a lot of stuff to sell. Prize ticket. Bring this to a prize machine in Lewis's house. Oh, he's got a prize machine in his house. And we gotta go to the museum. See what's up with these glass shards. And yeah, I think that's I think that'll do it. I'm finally, I've come to a sort of point of peace at this game where I feel like maybe I can just go to sleep and then I don't have to keep playing. Let's see how much money we made. Okay. Wow, that corn was a lot of money. Those large eggs are also quite a lot. All right, not bad, not bad. I'm fucking sleepy. All right, I think it's time to boop. Boop 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 boo. I know, I'm speechless. Doesn't usually happen. I think this is fine for a semifinal recap. I think we might even just do. We'll call this finished. I think I'm ready for the final recap. That's when we're gonna bust out our charts and all that stuff. I'm yawning like crazy. What's up with it? I can't talk without yawning. Well, I think that's a good sign that it's time to end the stream. So, yeah, thanks for watching. It was a pretty boring stream. I didn't really go off as much, but it was nice to play some video games. Yeah, I'm probably not going to do that. I'm not going to do the video games in the final recap. But I might start incorporating video games into like our first listen throughs or something. Maybe not first listen throughs, but yeah, we'll see. All right, until next time, everybody, take care and see you next time.